But let's just get started by introducing our great panelists today. Ashley, could you kick off and just tell us a little bit about yourself, the organization you're with, and then maybe a little bit about the audience that you serve with your organization?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Capetta. I'm the Director of Content and Creative at Campus Philly. And just for some background, Campus Philly is a nonprofit, and our team is dedicated to fueling economic growth in our city by encouraging college students and recent graduates to explore, live, and work in the greater Philadelphia region. So by that end, our audience is college students and recent graduates. And I am really excited to be here today. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for being here. One other thing, as our panelists can introduce themselves, what's kind of your stake within the social media side? Are you the sole person? Are you part of a team? How's that look?
Yeah, I am the sole person currently doing all of our social media. And then we usually outsource our TikTok content to our student contributors and our interns.
Awesome. Thanks. I will kick it on over now to Michael DeAngelis.
Thanks, Maddie. Hi, everyone. I'm Michael DeAngelis. I am the Digital Resources Manager in Career Services, which means that under my purview is our social media. And we'll talk about how we handle that in our office as part of this conversation, but also all of our technology platforms and communication initiatives, including the CS Radio podcast, which is what I'm going to be mostly talking about here today with my colleague and co-host Milan. So I'm just going to punt it to her since we sort of are a package today.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. As Michael said, my name is Milan Kirshner. I'm an associate director in career services. I work on the team that meets with college students. Actually, a lifetime ago, used to have Michael's role as well. So that's kind of how I started in this space. But yeah, I'm also on the social media committee presently and just have always been kind of invested in those channels as they've grown in career services. So I'm excited. I'm really excited about the panel today. So impressed with everyone who's joining us. So I will pass it to Maggie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie. I'm the Senior Social Media Manager at The Muse. The Muse, if you're not familiar, is essentially the go-to destination for the next gen workforce to find companies, search for career advice. So we have a ton of really good career advice content, resume tips, interview tips, all of that. Our audience is pretty wide ranging. We have, young professionals who are just getting started in their career to those who are working up their way to the C-suite. In all different areas, sales, marketing. We really serve a huge demographic, which is really awesome. And I am the sole full-time social person, but I work with my wonderful coworker who is here, Karen, who I'll kick it off to, who is our social media coordinator.
Hi, I'm Karen. I work with Maggie at The Muse as the social coordinator. And I'm excited to talk about career platforms and social.
Awesome. Then we're also joined by Joe. Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm the Associate Director of the Graduate Student Center at Penn, University of Pennsylvania. I started in my role actually last April. And part of my role is running the communications for the center. So not only do I draft up the newsletter, but I'm also running our social media accounts on Instagram, Facebook, and what's the other one? Twitter. Those are the three. So our audience is mainly graduate and professional students at Penn. So yeah, that's pretty much, I think I answered all the questions.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I do a terrible job of introducing myself all the time, but I'm Maddie. I also work in career services. I also happen to serve on the social media committee through our office. So help looking at our Instagram. We've also done some branding overhauls and things like that I've been a part of. I'm an occasional co-host on the podcast that Michael and Milan are talking about today. So great to be here and to have all of our wonderful panelists here today. Let's start with some basic stuff. So what's your favorite social media platform to be using right now?
I would say for both personal and for the Muse, it's really been Instagram for us. I think it's just one of those platforms where, both a challenge and opportunity. There's all these new features coming out. There's stories, there's reels, there's videos, photos. there's just so much that you can do. And I think that just makes it a really exciting platform. I personally also just see, the best engagement with our audience on there, from getting direct messages to comments. It just seems like one of those platforms where people are really coming to want to be engaged with the content that's happening on the platform.
I'll actually chime in as well. I personally spend way too much time on Instagram and I've considered removing it. But then I'm like, I use it for career services as well. I'm glad you mentioned stories in particular, because I think that's been a big initiative of ours recently. We've kind of done a quick questions segment where we just pop in a question box and allow students to just pose us questions directly. That has actually worked surprisingly well. So certain weeks there's a dip and we don't get a lot of engagement, but we've tried a few different approaches, sometimes making it a little bit more focused. We've had guest hosts. It's not always me hosting it, although I have a number of times. One of the particularly popular ones, not surprisingly, was a pre-health day, questions about questions from students who are considering a pre-med path. So those have worked really well. And I think I agree with Maggie that personally Instagram is where it's at for me.
All right, I'm going to go rogue. And I'm going to say Twitter. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Instagram, and I also spend all my time on Instagram, and also tell myself I can't get rid of it because it's my job. It's very convenient excuse to have. But I will say Twitter has its own advantages, particularly with the podcast. I find that we engage more deeply on Instagram with the fan base. Instagram, when we do things like quick questions, we have good engagement, but otherwise it's a heart, right? They liked it, which is great, but it's not a conversation. And I find I can have a conversation on Twitter more often than I can on any other platform. And that's a valuable engagement. We do find, just anecdotally, I'm sure people will ask us about like how we get our user statistics and things like that, but anecdotally, for career services, our engagement on Twitter is with graduate students, other career centers, employers, parents, not so much undergraduates engaging that way in Twitter, but people who do want to engage with us will do it through Twitter to have a more conversation than just a like.
Yeah, I was actually going to second that, because since we mostly work with grad and professional students, we noticed that graduate and professional students are on Twitter more to like talk to you. Like they would rather respond to something, or they go on academic Twitter and retweet stuff and comment on it, or retweet it with a quote and things like that. So like, I think Instagram is visually a lot more fun for me personally when I'm doing it. Like I like making posts for Instagram. I like sharing them. I like seeing those likes go up, but I also feel like if I actually want to engage with the audience that I'm and like have a conversation with them, I would have to do that on Twitter. So it's like, it's hard to pick a favorite. It depends on what I'm doing, I guess.
Ashley, did you mention TikTok earlier? That Campus Philly is looking at TikTok?
Yeah, and I was just gonna say too, because our main platform, just to kind of echo, is Instagram. It's where our audience is, that 18 to 24 age range is really our pocket. And that's where they are most active. And also we find that Facebook is just not a great platform for us. It's not where our audience is really engaging. And then to everyone else's point too, with our Twitter and our LinkedIn, that's really where we have our main career content, or even where we're talking to our stakeholders. And then TikTok has just all of a sudden taken over a lot of what we're doing creatively, even repurposing student-led and student-created content that they are posting onto TikTok and then putting that into Instagram Reels. That engagement has just been phenomenal for us. And it also is a great way to just form a real sense of community, because then you're having a student from Temple tell you about a day in their life. And you're sort of asking students, like, we want to hear what that's like for you. Show us your campus, let's collaborate. Let's hear from you. Let's tell your story. So the combination almost of TikTok and Instagram has been our sweet spot for the last few weeks.
That's awesome. I'm not yet in on the TikTok game, but my girlfriend Emily sits behind me on that couch quite often, and I just hear her go, "I can't believe this app is free," and then she'll come and she'll show me one every now. So she's addicted to it already. In a few people's responses, it came up the idea of the different constituents or stakeholders that you all have. I wonder if there's different action items, like what's your main goal with social media, and what do you really want to get your audience to be able to respond to? What do you want them to be able to do after they're responding or looking at your social media presence?
I'll kick that one off. At our core, Campus Philly our goal is to get students excited about living and working and being in Philadelphia. So a lot of our content, even just on Instagram, is going to be about a student discount at the PMA or things to do along the waterfront, and then mixing in that career content so everything feels really fluid, versus LinkedIn and Twitter for us, as I said, is more of our stakeholder audience. And that's really the call to action there, is to either, get involved with Campus Philly in some way, in some capacity, share what's happening with your organization or on your campus so that we can tell that to our audience. So the messaging is different. We find that we have to have different promotional plans depending on what we're announcing and what we're sharing. But I think the platform also lends itself to that. Instagram is that fun, bright, engaging, all those colors, versus LinkedIn, where you're really getting to the meat of what you're promoting and what you're sharing.
Yeah, I would say for the grad center, since the University of Pennsylvania is very decentralized, grad students, professional students, even undergrads, I'm sure, come in there and they're like, where are things? Where are resources? And every school does things differently. So like our role is basically to be a kind of centralized place where grad and professional students can come and find things. So that's pretty much what we use our social media for, is to share information, share events. So we share a lot of programming events, but we'll also share like, oh, do you need to know how to format your dissertation? Here's where you can find that. So it's a lot of resource stuff. And then also there's the, hey, we're here for you, keep going, you're doing great. Don't let that thing get you down. There's a lot of that too. So like ours is a big mix of what we're sharing, which can be overwhelming sometimes when you're running it.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Maggie. No, go ahead, Maggie.
I was just gonna say, I can kind of like echo the same sort of thing. We have, different goals depending on like the type of content. Like for us as the Muse, like probably our biggest thing is just, brand awareness, just getting out there. We're the first kind of place for a lot of people to get introduced to the Muse. So that's like a huge one for us. We also are a publisher. So driving traffic, to those advice articles are really helpful, or is definitely a part of our goal. And then we also, depending on the platform, something like LinkedIn, when we're sharing about companies or roles that are open, that's like a great platform for us. So something like job apply clicks. But I wanted to have Karen kind of jump in on what Joe was saying at the end around like that sort of like sentiment, feeling of like being supportive. I think that's something that we've done a lot, and Karen's worked on that quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. We've definitely been leveraging a lot of like work-life balance and mental health awareness type rhetoric for a lot of our different advice articles, to be able to like engage with our audience on a personal level, as well as also as job seekers.
Awesome to hear. So everything changed with the pandemic, but maybe it didn't with social media. I'm not sure. Have things changed for you all in your strategy for social media in the last year or so? And in what ways? How have you refocused? Has it been a style change? Has it been a quantity change or a content change? What are your thoughts there?
I think one of the main things we did was when the pandemic first hit, we decided, well, we had to cancel, obviously everyone had to cancel things, but we had college nights and things like that coming up. So how can we get students excited about living and being in Philly if they're not in Philly? So we decided to actually create a giant, and I say giant because it's pages and pages, resource guide where students can really segment by what they want to see and what they want to learn about Philadelphia. And now that's just become common practice for us. Of every semester, we are developing a large resource guide that has everything students need to know about being a student in Philadelphia. And that was something that came out of the pandemic for us that has just been so helpful with engagement. It's content to pull from, it's content to repurpose. There's always something else to say, to add. We can spotlight different students and their stories. We can pull from young professionals who got a job in the midst of a pandemic. What does that story look like? All of those things have been really exciting for us. And I think that was like our main thing that we really had to shift and say, what kind of resources are we really offering to students who are not on campus, and how can we still get them to feel excited about living and working in Philadelphia?
Yeah, we definitely had to switch a ton of our, content, the traditional networking, going to networking meetups, like that was, not gonna really work anymore in a pandemic. So a lot of our, copy was changed. Are there, tips from those type of networking articles that we can pull out that apply to like virtual or remote networking? I think too, a huge thing for us in the very beginning was we really listened to our audience. We were really just paying attention to conversations that were happening online around job searching or unemployment, and seeing how can we like best position ourselves to help and support people. I remember we ran an Instagram story in the beginning, actually asking people what kind of content would be helpful for them. What are they going through right now? I think just always having like that open conversation and dialogue with your audience can really help drive the content that is going to be supportive for them. And it's going to be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. What's fascinating is that career services was poised to do a real major refresh of its social media look and strategy as this all hit anyway. So these two things dovetailed. I would say that some of the things that changed during the pandemic were a little bit in our messaging, which we had to reassure our constituents that all of the services that they were accustomed to were going to be available to them, even though we weren't in the office. So that included appointments, and that included career fairs, and all of the one-to-one things that we used to do in person. We needed to assure them that we could still do that virtually. And I'm just really happy to say that we were able to do all of that virtually. So that sort of messaging took precedent, but it also freed us to try new things. Like Milan mentioned, that quick questions. I don't know if we would have necessarily tried that. We might have, because we were in sort of a new era of thinking anyway. But the pandemic, the idea of doing it was originally called Quick Questions from Quarantine, and seeing if we could engage with people that way, and it worked out really well. And I have to say, it has been hit or miss. There would be times where like we were making up the questions because we weren't getting any from the audience. We'd be like, all right, maybe this will be the last. We'll do it again next week. And then if nobody asks, we'll just put this to bed. And then the next week there'd be 50 questions, right? It would you just don't know, right? So we've kept doing it. And I think it would be missed if it went away. Totally. We also tried doing some live streaming events. Maddie and I did a couple. We brought on some of our colleagues. We took questions in chat, very similar to what we're doing today. And that was something exciting to try. So, that was the silver lining to this, is like, well, let's start throwing things against the wall to see what sticks. And if it doesn't work, we can just go, well, COVID, so that was really freeing in a way.
Does anyone else have a podcast? I mean, obviously I know we do. Does anyone else have something like that? So I will expand it to everyone else, but I want to start with Michael and Milan, because I'm curious what your take is on how that podcast interconnects with our other social media presences online.
Great. Do you want to kick off, Milan? No. Okay.
Yeah. Take it away.
Well, I think it's very interconnected in a couple of different ways, and I think they mutually feed off each other. So I did mention at the top that I am nominally in charge of the office's social media presence, but as Maddie mentioned, we do have a committee, right? We've got a committee of 4 or 5 people that are sharing the workload, because it is a lot of work. You're not only needing to post something, you need to decide what you're posting and when you're posting it. And we spend a lot of time putting together like a social media schedule, and we share that workload. The benefit for me, other than sharing the workload, is that people bring their unique contributions to social media. And Mila and I might see something that we've posted on Instagram or on the blog or have tweeted and go, that's a great topic because it's something that's coming up that we want to talk to our audience about, or it's just something that's really interesting. And then it's just nice, then it feeds the other way too. We have something very different that we can share on our social media. We have audio clips of Milan and I and our guests talking that we can turn into video for Instagram or audio on Twitter, and drive people to our social media and back to the podcast, sort of symbiotically. And we get good feedback on that. Again, particularly early on, we've been doing the podcast. We just finished up our 6th season of doing it, which is like, we always say we can't believe it's been that long. But particularly early on, the feedback that we would get on Twitter, a lot of it was from parents who were hearing the podcast. And for us, that's great. That's great because that means we're getting that career services messaging out the way we want it to get out to parents. It's not being filtered through their students who may or may not have their own filter on it, right? So knowing that we were reaching parents that way was really great, and reaching alumni that way. And we had a couple people reach out and then ask to be on the show. So it's been really good from us, from just a career services sort of branding standpoint, strengthening the brand of career services. I know Milan got approached by at least one student on a bus one time.
I think that was slightly contrived. My name is Googleable. It's not a common one. So I think that CS Radio was probably one of the first things that came up, and she sidled in and we had a little mini career coaching session on the bus ride. But I see that kind of related in the comments. Andrea asked about conversion, driving engagement between students and staff. And I would say I've definitely met with students in my office who say my parents heard the podcast and said that I should come in and talk with you. I also think we're able to facilitate alumni conversations as well. I see you mentioned that Platt does it in that way. We've definitely featured alumni and promoted some of their upcoming books, a podcast through our guests, and probably intuitively, but I also refer students to previous episodes. We did one, Michael has gone to the Austin Film Festival and comes back with great insight on entertainment and that space in general. And almost invariably, I meet with students immediately following that with these big questions about that industry. And I say, oh, you should absolutely check out that podcast. Michael has all of the latest from a conference that he can that we shared and talked about on the podcast. So they serve as these like moments in time that you can refer students to, so they can hear that good insight and hear from those guests and those alumni as well.
And current students too, right? That's a big part of our mission in career services, is to highlight student stories. And so when we're able to have a student on who had a great summer experience through our summer funding program, or met with Milan or met with another advisor and they were referred to us because they had just a really great story, we're eager to share that. It's good for everybody.
Milan, do you see that question in chat?
The one that Andrea just put in about whether
just because we're already on the topic.
Yeah, we have a lot of podcasts. So we definitely have repurposed. So we've talked about resumes more than once. We talk about networking all the time. It's a good question. I know that a lot of our staff members listen to the podcast. We get nice comments from them. I haven't explicitly asked how many of them directly point students to specific episodes, but that's a great question, and one that we should probably visit at some point over.
Yeah, I don't have hard numbers, but I know that they do, right? Because we hear about it in staff meeting or just when we used to pass each other in the halls. But someone will say, oh, I was so glad. Usually when it's on one of those really specific industry topics, maybe not so much like our resume tips one, because we're pulling that from our website and right, we're giving the brand advice. But for when we have a guest on, or when we're doing something specific, like talking about the entertainment industry, or Natty did one where he talked about like being a YouTuber, I know that advisors who have then had students come in and ask questions about those specific things have said, we've done a podcast on that.
Yeah, I think the other one that got referenced was the gaming to case interviewing and vice versa, the similarities and kind of problem solving. That was a fun one. Duo, a pair of episodes.
And for those that don't have podcasts, what's like the new space that you're thinking about entering, or maybe a space that you're already in that you feel social media has really enhanced for you in some sort of way?
So even though we don't have a podcast, which now I feel like we should, because this all sounds so great and amazing. We launched something this past summer called Campus Philly Conversations, and they're 30 to 40 minutes. They happen either on Instagram Live or via Zoom, and we invite a guest to come in and just speak to our audience. It's an open invitation for all students. They know the time, they know that it's going to be reoccurring. They kind of pop in and we talk about career advice. We talk about how to launch right after you graduate, what that looks like for a lot of students, especially right now, who are looking for a job and maybe aren't being as successful as they wanted to be right out of school. So we kind of hit all of those points. Like I would liken it to a podcast in the sense of it's a great dialogue. And I think it really helps the students who are kind of itching for that kind of advice. So that's sort of, and then promoting that on social media and then repurposing that content too, the same way that you guys just talked about, and just, leveraging that and sharing that audio clip or swipe up link to watch the full video. All of those things are really great tools for us.
Yeah, I think for the Muse, it might be a little bit different just because we're, a publisher and kind of coming from that angle. But I think something that's been big for us in the last year is just supporting like our co-founders as like thought leaders. So with the Muse, they're huge in, the human resources, talent acquisition, this sort of space. So we on social try and find ways that we can support them, whether, if one of our co-founders has, press, or she's written a LinkedIn article, or ways that we can kind of support them. Any Muse employee as well, if they're, writing their own LinkedIn articles, just how we can like support them on social and try and get more involved in those conversations.
What do you all think is particularly challenging about having quality social media content that's also specifically tailored to job seekers, or from the lens of professional development for Joe, who sometimes has things that aren't only for job seekers, but also for a broader community? What are the unique challenges that brings up for us all?
For us, it's definitely the diversity of our audience, since Penn is huge and their grad and professional population is also huge. It's like 15,000 students or something ridiculous like that. So and plus there's graduate students who are like just working on a PhD. And then we also have professional students who are getting an MBA or a law degree or a medical degree. So it's like, we just have like this huge diversity. So we can't really like talk about specific things too much. And I think that makes it hard to get engagement, because if things are broad, people are less likely to really care about it because they don't feel like you're talking to them. So I think that's our biggest challenge, is actually like making our stuff specific enough that we can engage with certain pockets of our population at different times of the year. And knowing what time things are appropriate to actually post stuff on social media that we're going to get that engagement. That is also challenging because we have so many different populations we have to pay attention to.
Is there a favorite campaign or something that you guys have had recently that just stands out as being just something you're really proud of that you were able to do or accomplish through social media? Even if it didn't maybe get all the engagement you want, but it was just a great idea that you were happy to pilot, anything like that?
Yeah, I would say last year for us, I know someone mentioned kind of going to like lives, if it's Instagram Live or Facebook Live. We did a LinkedIn Live series right after LinkedIn kind of, I think now maybe most pages have it, but last year it had just sort of launched. And so we set up a LinkedIn Live series where we were just trying to support, you know, other talent and HR professionals around, you know, this time in COVID. How can you, you know, remain, how can you have empathy? How can you, you know, just kind of deal with this time overall? And for us, we hadn't dived into lives at all. I am someone who thinks to the worst case scenario. So a live is very daunting because you cannot really practice it. You know, it's very on the fly. But it was a really cool challenge for us. We ended up doing 4 in total. They weren't necessarily the best engagement for us, but we positioned ourselves out there. We tried something new. We ended up doing more Instagram lives after. So we still had those learnings from that and built some really good relationships with guests that we had on, which we still have those to this day. We see them share content. So it was just it wasn't the best engagement wise, but I feel like there were a lot of positives that came out of it. Yeah.
Something new that Campus Philly did this year, we used to do something called Intern Philly, which was basically just sending traffic to our job boards so that students would find and apply for jobs. And this year, maybe it was just the fact that there were so many festivals happening virtually. We said, what if we just threw something called a job fest? And we made a really cool graphic that looked like Bonnaroo and Firefly and had all these crazy colors on it. And we just did this whole campaign and we were like, let's just run with it. So we threw it together. I say threw it together because it just kind of happened. It really came together quickly. We were just really excited about it. We reached out to some partners and we ended up having 10 days of giveaways from companies like Tasty Cake and Eagles and all these things. Like the Eagles even gave us a virtual lunch and learn. And so students could win prizes. They could like actual fun prizes. And then they could also win a coffee chat with a recruiter at Comcast or something like that. So we really diversified that content and then made it clear that it's like a 10-day virtual experience. You're looking for a job, you're finding a job, you are reading our career advice, you're engaging with us across all of our social media platforms. And the only way that you can win these amazing prizes is if you engage, you answer these questions, you get involved with us in some way. So the ask was really low for students. And I think that's even why I'm proud to say that it worked. It was definitely something we're going to continue to do. So look out for Job Fest 2022. But it was a really great experience and something that we said, let's run with what's happening on social. If everyone's on social, throwing festivals, making it really engaging, these like, and I just keep saying these bright colors because it was just, that was what was eye-catching, making something that looks like Bonnaroo happen for a small nonprofit was really like it was a great success for us.
It's awesome. It sounds like good swag. I'd do anything for a butterscotch crimpet. So
yeah, me too.
Sounds like good partnership
Yep.
there.
Yep.
I'm actually curious, Ashley, just a quick question. Did you end up building that graphic or did you have, yeah.
I did, yeah, and that was also a nice little challenge. And we did like an announcement on Instagram with a multi-photo just to sort of take over the feed, which was also great because that makes people excited to see it. And then we leveraged a couple, we call them our Campus Philly VIPs, so students who engage with us on a regular basis, past interns, things like that. And we said, why don't you guys be our festival promoters? We'll throw you a $10 gift card to Grubhub and you can post this lineup on your stories. And that also kind of revved up the engagement, sort of also made people think, well, what's Campus Philly doing? And what's happening next week? And why is there a 10-day festival that I've never heard of? And that kind of surprise really worked for us as well.
That's so cool. I wanted to say that kind of with the challenge, we had that question earlier, you're like making that graphic and making it cool. I feel like that's sort of something that I run into challenging with just career advice in general. Like, how do I make this work for a platform like Instagram that's super visual? I think that's something that's always been challenging. It's so satisfying when it works out and you can figure out, how to make a big block of text work on an Instagram graphic. But that just reminded me of that. So that's really cool that you were able to kind of find that way in there and make that trend work. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, like, leveraging the trends of like festivals is just a really cool idea. Like, I think for us, like, a big challenge is usually just like leveraging trends in general and finding like good graphics that are engaging, and it's really cool to get to do that.
What inspires everybody? Has there been like a social media thing you saw elsewhere? Maybe it was a big account or a public account that you saw that you're like, oh man, I can't wait to steal that idea. Where do you all find inspiration?
From the folks that are on this call, for sure. I mean, we were very deliberate in our invitations to have everybody join today. The Muse is something that we go to all the time for podcast topics. I mean, all the time, and also is something that we share their articles on social media a lot too. Just think the content is great. And Campus Philly, we're longtime partners. We believe in their mission, and they do a great job with their social media campaigns. I'll get tagged in a message from Campus Philly. I always go right and look at it, and I get excited, and then I remember I'm not a student anymore and I can't do these things. But that's exciting. We definitely draw inspiration from that. We look at our other colleagues at Penn, see what they're doing. We're always interested in how people are highlighting students, something that we're doing. In fact, I would say that's probably my answer for the last question. We did a real push to make sure we're constantly focusing or spotlighting students on the social media. We have sort of a nice backlog of students that we've worked with that we can highlight. And so we made sure that every Friday we have a feature Friday of our students, and my colleague B puts that up every Friday. We've got a good template, nice picture, and then you can swipe over for a nice big block quote. So just like you were saying, it's really satisfying when you can get a really good quote in a nice graphical form. So that's, we're always looking for ways to highlight students, particularly around this time of year as people are getting jobs and are excited about moving on from Penn.
I have a question about data in the chat, which I'm going to throw to Michael, at least for career services.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question. And actually, maybe some of our partners might have better answers for this. Obviously, we're able to track engagement at a certain level, how many followers we have, how many likes certain thing gets, how many views a video gets. Do people engage with quick questions on a particular day? The thing that I get asked the most that I don't have hard data on is, well, how do those numbers break out? How many are undergrads? How many are grads? How many are alums? How many are employers? I mean, I could filter out the employers, but if it's just Joe Smith following me, I would have to do some real research on who that person is. So that sort of information we have mostly anecdotally, but I feel pretty secure in my assessment that the majority of the students who engage with us on Twitter are graduate students, and the majority of the students who engage with us on Instagram are undergraduates, and everyone has left Facebook. I think it's the first time we've even said Facebook in this conversation.
I'll also quickly add that the questions that came in on our most recent quick questions when we were not populating them ourselves were from incoming students as well. So I think there's times of years where we get students who are really eager to engage with us in all of the ways. And social media is, of course, an easy first touch for that as well.
I can kind of dive into that too. I see like the next question about kind of gathering data as well. We use a few tools at the Muse. We have a few tools that we pay for. So we use Sprout Social, which is like a content management tool. Similar ones are like Buffer, Hootsuite, Sprinkler, kind of like those big ones. They do have, I think, free versions of a few of them, but we get reporting insights from them. They are just basically aggregated from platforms themselves. So even if you're not able to pay for a tool, you can really get a good amount of data from the platforms. I would say something like Instagram, their data that you just get on the app is actually fantastic. I prefer to just go into Instagram and look myself. We're finally getting Reels data, which I'm very excited for. So that's what we use. There's also like specific tools for just Instagram. We also are really lucky to have an analytics manager at the Muse that I can work with closely on just, for us, since traffic is so big, where's our traffic coming from? He knows Google Analytics, I do not. So I work really closely with him as well. But I would say like, I'm always surprised at how much data I can actually just pull from the platforms themselves and keep track from there.
It's a good time now that as we're getting close, we have just a couple of minutes left. If people want to continue to ask questions, we can respond to those.
Well, I see we've just got a question here in the chat about preferred tools, image library for creating social media images, especially for staff who do social media as part of their job along other responsibilities. Well, that's certainly, I think, the case for all of the Penn people on this call. We're using a variety of tools. We just, in the past year, were able to get Canva accounts for the people who are working in social media in our office or have other design responsibilities. Canva has been a real lifesaver. It's so easy to use. It integrates with a lot of the social media platforms, so you can schedule and post right from it. They have, if you're using a professional license, they have a vast library of photos and art for you to use. You're able to assign your own branding to it, and I alluded to earlier that Career Services recently went through a lot of work to realign our brand and refresh it and come up with a very set design guidelines. And having a tool like Canva where the fonts and the colors are just burnt in and you don't have to think about it very much has been great. We've also always had the Adobe suite, which is for more advanced users. You kind of have to learn how to use Photoshop or Illustrator or things like that. It's not as click and point as Canva, but that's something that's available to our staff as well. I think those are the main design tools that we're using.
And then the last question I saw was about driving attendance to events and getting the RSVP data for that. Does anyone have experience with what that looks like?
We mostly use Eventbrite. Did I just cut you off, Joe? I'm sorry. We mostly use Eventbrite to collect, or Salesforce. That's really how we're collecting registration and then registration information. Yeah, I don't even think we have been using Facebook, because everyone's kind of saying Facebook is just so not what we're doing anymore. But yeah, those two have been really helpful for us, especially because you can curate that sign up form to whatever information you want to collect from your audience. So that's our main tool.
Awesome. Well, we're at time now. So I'd like to thank all of our great panelists for being here today with us and sharing all of their great insights. Claire just put in the chat as well that after this session, we're going to have a Meetaway virtual networking session. So if you want to make your way over to there, that'll be a great time to get some one-on-one time with people to continue conversations. So thanks again. Thank you for everyone for joining today and watching, and a special thanks to our panelists as well. Have a great rest of the day.